Gender equality remains a struggle for many countries today, but what exactly can we learn from our ancestors? Let's find out. Mabuhay or Kapampangan, luwid kayo. Welcome back to my channel. It's me, Kirby Araullo, your friendly Pinoy historian. And if you are new to my channel, in this channel, I make videos about our people's history, our people's culture, and everything in between. So if you like any of those things, don't forget to like, share this video, comment down below, and please subscribe. So March 8th is International Women's Day. So in today's video, let's learn more about the status of pre-colonial women in the region we now call Southeast Asia. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video. Just kidding, there's no sponsor for today's video. But making these videos takes a lot of time, research, and it does cost money. So if you want to help me make more videos like this, please consider being my patron or be a member of my channel. And you can also support me by getting copies of any of my books or coloring books and ebooks. To learn more and expand your knowledge about today's topic, check out the links below to pre-order my book and coloring book about the fierce women of early Southeast Asia, where you can learn more and meet over 3 dozen examples of fierce women from the histories and the oral traditions of our ancestors. So don't miss out and pre-order your copies today. So without further ado, let's learn more about the status of women in the diverse but interconnected pre-colonial societies of what is now Southeast Asia. The position of women and their political, social, and economic roles in the societies of what is now Southeast Asia, in the centuries prior to the advent of European colonialism in the early modern period from the 1500s to the 1700s, was very different to what it became once this region was conquered by the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, and others. So the Europeans introduced their own gender conventions into the cultures of this vast region. In general, this followed the European pattern of being a male-dominated society where women were typically viewed as mothers who ran the households. And the realms of politics, trade, economic activity, military affairs, and the arts and literature were all typically reserved for men. However, as the following highlights and examples would show, women were accorded much greater status in the indigenous pre-colonial societies of Southeast Asia, and the subordination of women was largely a European imposition following the conquest of the region. And a good starting point in assessing how women's position was fundamentally different in pre-colonial Southeast Asia can be seen by looking at the role in the islands we now call the Philippines, my motherland. In the pre-colonial period of the 15th century and much of the 16th century before Spain began conquering the region, the islands we now call the Philippines were divided up between many sultanates, kingdoms, city-states, and principalities. And in these societies, women often performed highly important roles. And most notably in this respect was the role of the datu, the ruler of a given group of indigenous people across the islands. Being a datu could be carried out by a female ruler, and the succession did not automatically bypass an older daughter in favor of a younger son. Indeed, women's role as rulers in the islands which make up the archipelago were so significant that the islands we now call the Philippines was once given the nickname of the Queen Country of Ancient Asia. This pattern of female power was also reflected elsewhere in the pre-colonial society throughout the archipelago. For instance, the highest spiritual leaders, the class of priestesses and healers, known as Babaylans in the Visayas, or the Catalonans in the Tagalogs, or Mamaluyans in Kapampangan, were almost universally elderly women. They were held in high regard and presided over rituals and ceremonies and in the healing of illnesses of the people and society. The few men who were able to obtain a position within this class of priests and doctors are generally believed to have been transvestites and or transgenders. And this is also going to be a future video topic, so stay tuned. Elsewhere, married women in the Philippines, such as in Luzon, in Mindanao, and Palawan, were economically independent of their husbands. They could inherit properties during their marriage, whereas in Europe, women can only inherit properties if they were unmarried or widowed. If European women were married at the time of inheritance, the husband inherited the land, money, or possessions, not the women. And in the Philippines, documents signed and agreements witnessed by women were also of a higher value than those done without their presence. Indeed, this lack of gender discrimination extended down to the very structures of society and language across the Philippines. For instance, the descent through one's ancestor was traced through both the paternal and the maternal lines. Similarly, in the many indigenous languages of the islands, such as in Kalinga, Tagalog, and Kapampangan, the preference was overwhelmingly for using gender-neutral language. And thus, the equivalent of the word child was used as opposed to the gender binary terms of son and daughter. And speaking of children, women also had the freedom and the rights over their own bodies and sexuality, including the right to have an abortion and the right to decide the number of children they want to have. And yes, virginity was not even that big of a deal back then. But let's save more about this topic in a future video, so stay tuned. The overwhelming impression conveyed by all of this was that age, rather than gender, was the primary manner in which the indigenous societies across pre-colonial Philippines were structured. It was only during the advent of Spanish rule from the mid-16th century onwards that the chauvinist and misogynistic society was imposed and became commonplace across the archipelago. Wait lang, so what about the rest of Southeast Asia? What was it like for women across the different parts of the region? This pattern of women empowerment was also reflected elsewhere throughout Southeast Asia. In regions such as what are now Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and others, there was a much greater emphasis on rulers being able to act as military commanders. Now normally, in most societies, this necessarily implied that men should be kings or sultans in the region. Yet even here, there was a tradition of women acting as commanders and governors. A Thai inscription from the year 1400 describes how the Queen Mother of Sukhothai accompanied her son on a campaign to recover lost territories. Court literature from the same region regularly features stories of women donning men's clothing and guiding the forces into combat. They were literally on the front lines of the battlefields. In the late 1500s, we even find the ruler of the Sultanate of Aceh on the island of Sumatra in modern-day Indonesia appointing a female commander as admiral of his navy. Her name was Malahayati, and she was the first recorded officially appointed female admiral in the history of the world. In the 1590s and the 1600s, Admiral Malahayati led the resistance in the Straits of Malaka and the Indian Oceans against the Portuguese and Dutch colonists. Now all of this is not to suggest that Europe did not have its own Joan of Arc or its Queen Elizabeth I, but the incidence of female rulers and female military commanders was so much greater across Southeast Asia than was the case in the late medieval or early modern Europe. And there are so many examples from Thailand, Myanmar, Malaysia, and across the archipelagos of the Philippines and Indonesia. And it was not just in the areas of female rule and female military commanders that Southeast Asian societies were more permissive and gender neutral. And perhaps the most important area of gender politics, that of marriage, there was significant equality across the region. For instance, divorce was much more widely practiced in Southeast Asia than in Europe, where the efforts of King Henry VIII of England to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, attest to the difficulties of attaining marriage annulment in European societies. In Southeast Asia, especially during the 1400s and the 1500s, separations were easily obtained and could be initiated by either the husband or the wife. For example, it was claimed by one early European observer that in the Philippines, marriages last only so long as harmony prevails, for at the slightest cause in the world, they divorce one another. And the same was also prevalent in the early societies of what are now Thailand and Vietnam, where women divorcing their husbands would take with her whatever goods or property she had brought into the marriage. It was even the case on the island of Java in what is now Indonesia. It was recorded that a pre-colonial Javanese woman may at any time, when dissatisfied with her husband, demand the termination of their marriage. And the same was recorded in the Philippines. And thus women in the islands of Southeast Asia could easily leave unsatisfactory marriages, and this provided them with so much greater liberty in comparison to their European counterparts. Now, the concept of matrilineal inheritance is rare in most societies, But the indigenous Minangkabau society of Sumatra has been recognized as one of the largest groups in the world with such matriarchal systems. In fact, their matriarchal culture has attracted scholars wondering how it fits in the Islamic framework. For example, inheritance in the Minangkabau society is traced through the female line. Another example is that when the husband became seriously ill, he was taken to his mother's house for recovery, and upon his death, he would be buried in the graveyard of his mother. As mentioned, today's video is just a short introduction about the status of women in the early history of what is now Southeast Asia. And in the coming weeks, I'll also be making separate videos about the golden age of Southeast Asian queens, the fierce warrior women of what is now Southeast Asia. So make sure to stay tuned and, subscribe and click that bell icon so you don't miss out when these videos come out. Now back to our topic. Women also played an important role in the economy of Southeast Asia, and this was particularly the case in the spheres of trade and marketing, a pattern which persists in Southeast Asia down to the present day. European visitors to the markets of ports, towns, and cities across the region, such as in Melaka, Manila, Ayutthaya, Aceh, and Lemak in the 1500s, would have been so surprised to see that women were not just traders, but they were often more numerous than men. For example, in Malacca, there was even a night market that was run exclusively by women. Now, admittedly, the bigger number of merchants and overseas traders were typically men. However, women in Southeast Asia were not excluded from this sphere at the same time. One famous instance is Nai Gede Pinate, a female Muslim merchant at Gresik on the island of Java in the late 1400s and early 1500s, and she obtained the position of harbor master and sent her ships as far north and east as Cambodia, Bali, and the Moluccas. Indeed, this pattern of female involvement in Southeast Asian trade never really ended, despite European encroachments. A famous traditional Minangkabau poem encouraged mothers to teach their daughters to keep an eye on the rise and the fall of the prices of goods in the market. In other words, to see their early education as traders themselves. We can also see significant female involvement in the cultural output of Southeast Asia between the 1300s and the 1600s. For instance, when Ferdinand Magellan landed in the Philippines in 1521, during what became the first circumnavigation of the world, he was entertained in the city of Cebu by an orchestra of beautiful girls. And later on, members of his expedition also witnessed a group of jugglers and actors consisting of both males and females at Banten in Western Java. By way of contrast, in Europe, female roles in theater were still being performed by men or boys dressed up as women in the early 16th century. In fact, this would still be the case in Shakespeare's day, 3/4 of a century later. And it was not until the 1660s that English women were able to enjoy the ability to perform in the same way as their Southeast Asian counterparts. Similarly, storytelling in the East Indies was a cultural form which was often undertaken by middle-aged or elderly women. Moreover, the fact that the pre-colonial literacy rates were nearly as high amongst women and men in certain parts of Southeast Asia, like in the Philippines, suggests that many of the huge number of anonymously authored love poems and other works of literature from the region dating back to the 15th, 16th, or 17th centuries were written by women. And speaking of writing, I had so much fun, researching and writing my book and creating my coloring book about the fierce women of Southeast Asia. So if you want to learn more, dig deeper, and learn more about this topic, get to know over 3 dozen examples of fierce women in the history of Southeast Asia, make sure to visit my website and pre-order your copies today. In summary, the position of women in Southeast Asia prior to European colonialism of the 16th and 17th centuries was much greater than their European counterparts. Women could rule in places like Aceh, Patani, Sulawesi, Java, and Luzon, and this was not seen as any less legitimate than male leadership. Similarly, women played an absolutely central role to trade and commerce across the region, though their role in religious life could vary greatly, being more significant in regions like the Philippines, but much less influential in some regions to the west around the Malay Peninsula and the western end of the East Indies. Women also occupied a prominent position within the cultural life, and they enjoyed one of the greatest freedoms possible across much of the region in being able to initiate and obtain a divorce from a husband. And accordingly, taken as a whole, the status of women in pre-colonial Southeast Asian societies was in many ways far better than that of women in Europe. Southeast Asian women were not just confined to domestic and religious affairs. Many were the heads of the family and key decision makers in society. Many of them were fierce warriors in the battlefield, and many were also great leaders, rightfully revered by their people. Now, pre-colonial societies were not perfect by all means. It was not a paradise. But we can certainly learn a lot from our ancestors. I mean, to this day, to this very day, traditional societies like the indigenous Minangkabau of Sumatra or the Kapampangans of Luzon remain highly matriarchal. So yes, there is so much more to learn about our diverse people. We just need to dig deeper. And that is it for me today, so let me know what you think about today's topic. You know, what lessons can we learn from our ancestors? And please share what you know from your own roots, from your own backgrounds, from your own upbringing, from your own culture. You know, if I miss anything, please let us know in the comments below. Let us all learn from one another. So, if you like this video or learned a thing or two, don't forget to like, share this video, comment down below, and please subscribe. Help me grow my channel so more people can learn more about our people's history, culture, and everything in between. But of course, before we go, today's shoutout goes to Alev from Malaysia, Joel Priscilla May from Tagbilaran City in Bohol, Philippines, Saifa Mukhtar in Lampung, Sumatra, Indonesia, Swan from Vietnam, and Ying from Thailand. And special thanks and special shout out to my patron Sarah Rihais. This video will not be possible without the love and support of all my patrons through the years. So for those who want to help me make more videos like this, show your support and please be my patron or get a copy of any of my books or coloring books or any of the merch linked down below. Maraming salamat po. Magsukol daghang salamat agyamanak dakal pong salamat. O in Bahasa Melayu, terima kasih. And in Kamay or Kontram. See you next time, or in Tagalog, kita kits and in Kapampangan, Bikitix, and in Thai, Jergan Mai.